"Who is she?" The CEO's voice cut through the boardroom as she spotted Dana seated across from the branch manager. Her gaze sharp as a laser. No one answered right away. The room fell into dead silence. Karen, the receptionist who had earlier dismissed Dana, stood frozen outside the door. Peter Lang, the branch manager, was sweating through his collar, unable to speak. But Dana didn't need an introduction. She rose, adjusted her blazer, and spoke in a voice steady but ice cold. "I'm the one who was made to wait nearly 2 hours in the lobby, despite having a confirmed appointment. I'm the one you deemed unworthy of respect, simply because of my skin color." Elizabeth, CEO of Glenbridge Bank, turned to Peter Lang and said the one sentence that shattered the room. "You are suspended immediately. I will personally investigate this incident." This wasn't just a stunning reversal. It was the moment a black woman, once rendered invisible by a racist and biased system, forced an entire institution to confront itself and take a hard look in the mirror. And her story was far from over. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Atlanta's summer heat shimmered off the pavement. The kind of heat that made the air feel like it could melt. Dana Wilson stepped out of her car with calm, steady confidence. She was the CEO of Brightcore, a respected financial consulting firm known nationwide. She was no stranger to powerful rooms. But today, as she walked toward the Glenbridge Bank headquarters, something inside her felt tight, like a warning. The glass doors slid open. Cool air rushed out, not just refreshing, but dividing. A chill that separated who belongs here from who doesn't. The lobby was enormous. Marble floors, black leather chairs, crystal lights glowing overhead, the scent of espresso mixed with designer perfume, and something else, something invisible: judgment. Dana wore a perfectly tailored olive suit. Her natural curls were pulled back, neat and proud. She walked with grace toward the reception desk. Behind it sat a young white woman with blonde hair, typing quickly. Her eyes flicked to Dana's curls, then to her heels. There was a pause. Just long enough. In that glance, no warmth, no welcome, just calculation, as if checking an unwritten list of who gets noticed and who doesn't. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist asked, her tone polite but empty. Dana smiled calmly. "Yes, Dana Wilson. I have an appointment with Mr. Peter Lang at 10. The receptionist tapped a few keys. "You're here. Please take a seat. He'll see you shortly." No smile, no eye contact, no offer of water. Just a cold finger pointing toward the waiting area. Dana nodded and walked away. She'd seen this before. This wasn't new, but each time, it still stung. She chose a seat near the tall window. Sunlight streamed through, painting golden lines across the floor. She placed her handbag beside her and crossed her legs gently. The lobby around her buzzed with quiet conversations. People in sleek suits whispered about investments, mergers, meetings. Laughter drifted from one corner. A man walked by holding a latte and a platinum watch that sparkled under the light. Dana sat alone, waiting. Time passed. 10:05, then 10:20, then 10:40. Still no one called her name. Every time a door opened, her heart jumped only to fall again. Others came and went. White men in suits, blonde women in high heels, all greeted with warmth. Dana still invisible. At 10:50, a middle-aged white man in a gray suit walked in. No appointment, no waiting. The receptionist greeted him with a warm smile and led him straight through the doors. Dana watched. Next, A young woman with blonde hair and a designer purse stepped in. She didn't even speak, just smiled, and the receptionist stood up to escort her in like royalty. Dana checked her phone. No messages, no missed calls, just silence. By now, nearly an hour had passed. She uncrossed her legs, sat up straight, and took a deep breath. Her heart beat heavier with each second, not from fear, but from something deeper, something sharper, that feeling of being dismissed again. She looked around. The room had cleared out. All the favored clients had gone inside, the ones who looked like they belonged. She remained, still waiting, still unheard, still unseen. Dana adjusted her blazer and looked ahead with steady eyes. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was control, and beneath it, something was stirring. Something powerful, something that would not wait much longer. The room felt colder now, not from the air conditioning, but from the weight of being ignored. Dana glanced at the receptionist. Karen hadn't looked her way in over 30 minutes. She just typed, answered phones, and greeted every new face with a rehearsed smile. But never Donna. Another client arrived, a young white man in a casual polo. He laughed with Karen like they were old friends. She didn't check the schedule. She didn't ask for ID. She simply waved him through with a grin. Dana watched it all, her jaw clenched, but her face stayed calm. She glanced at her watch again. It was now 11:06, more than an hour since her appointment. She stood slowly, smoothing her skirt. Her heels clicked softly as she approached the desk. Karen barely glanced up. "Excuse me," Dana said, her voice polite but firm. "Has Mr. Lang been told I'm still waiting?" Karen's fingers danced across the keyboard, not missing a beat. "He's in a meeting. He'll see you shortly." No apology, no explanation, just the same words, over and over. Dana's heart pounded, but her voice didn't crack. "Could you give me a more specific time?" Karen didn't even blink. Karen gave a small shrug, her eyes fixed on the screen. "I'm not sure. It shouldn't be long." 4 words, casual, dismissive, designed to shut the door without slamming it. Dana stood there, silent. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Her breathing was calm, but something inside her had shifted. She nodded once, turned, and walked back to her seat. The sound of her heels echoed a little louder this time. Each step reminded her she was still waiting. Not because she was forgotten, but because she had been deliberately ignored. She sat down, straighter now, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She glanced toward the large window. Outside, the sun blazed across the city, cars passed, people hurried along the sidewalks. But in here, everything felt frozen, still, unmoving, as if the room itself had decided she didn't belong. Across the lobby, 2 employees chatted quietly. One of them glanced towards Dana, then leaned in and whispered something. They both smiled. She didn't need to hear the words. She had seen that smile before, too many times. That's how exclusion works. Not loud, not violent. Just quiet enough to feel like it's your fault for noticing. Dana's fingers tightened around her purse strap. Not from fear, not from anger, from restraint. She'd spent her whole career learning how to hold still, how to smile through silence, how to breathe past slights that were too subtle to call out but too deep to ignore. And yet, something felt different today. Every shortly, every indifferent glance, every warm greeting for someone else, it all added up. Across the room, a woman entered in a navy blue dress, her blonde curls perfect. She didn't check in. She didn't even slow down. Karen rose to greet her like an old friend. "Mrs. Lancaster, welcome back." Dana blinked. The boardroom doors opened almost instantly. A young staff member appeared beside Mrs. Lancaster and led her inside, smiling the entire time. No waiting, no questions. The rules, if they ever existed, had vanished. Dana looked down at her hands. The same hands that built her company from the ground up. The same hands that had signed million-dollar deals. Today, they sat folded in her lap, waiting like they didn't matter. But they did. She mattered. And that truth was beginning to rise. Quietly. Steadily. And it would not be ignored for much longer. It was now past 11:30. The lobby had nearly emptied. Dana remained in the same seat, same calm posture, same steady breath. But inside her, something had shifted. She was no longer wondering if she'd been forgotten. She knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision. And then it happened. A voice, soft but careless, floated from behind the reception desk. For Mrs. Lancaster, it's always an exception. Another voicemail, deeper, amused. Who can blame them with her profile? She'd be top priority anywhere. They laughed. Dana turned her head. The two employees fell silent. Their eyes met hers just for a second before darting away. No one apologized. No one looked ashamed. Because to them, it wasn't wrong. It was just normal. Dana looked down at her watch. Nearly 2 hours. Not a single update. Not a single explanation. Just the cold hum of air conditioning and the sting of overheard truths. In that moment, she wasn't just a woman waiting for a meeting. She was a black woman in a place that had already decided she didn't matter. And they expected her to keep waiting. Quietly. Dana's chest tightened. Not from surprise, but from the cold familiarity of it. She'd lived this scene before. Different banks, different buildings, same rules. Rules that never showed up in writing, but always showed up in treatment. She sat still, hands folded, but her thoughts raced. What would happen if she stood up? If she asked again? Would they smirk? Would they wave her off? Or worse, would they pretend she was the one being unreasonable? This was the silent trap, the one so many fell into. Speak too soon, you're emotional. Wait too long, you disappear. Dana was tired of the game. But more than that, she was tired of pretending the game didn't exist. A young man in a blue suit passed by. Karen greeted him with a smile. They exchanged a joke. He didn't even sit down. He walked straight past the glass doors. Dana looked away, not because she couldn't bear to see, but because she had seen enough. Her silence wasn't fear. It was calculation. She was measuring the moment. And now, the moment was measuring her back. How much longer would she sit quietly, just to be accepted? The air around Dana felt heavier now. Not just cold, but loaded. Every second that ticked by pressed down on her like a hand, trying to keep her small. She shifted slightly in her seat. Her legs were tense, her shoulders stiff. She had done everything right. She had shown up early. She had dressed the part. She had waited. Patiently. Silently. But nothing changed. Because in places like this, respect wasn't earned by merit. It was granted by perception. And perception was biased. Racist, quietly, systematically. Dana's eyes scanned the lobby. She could still hear the low murmur of conversations, the soft tap of keys, the distant hum of machines. But none of it felt real anymore. She felt like a ghost in a room full of comfort. And just when she thought it couldn't cut deeper, she saw Karen glance her way just briefly, then look away again with the same blank expression. Dana was no longer just overlooked. She was erased. In that flicker of dismissal, a truth sharpened inside her. She wasn't going to wait any longer. She wasn't here to be tolerated. She was here to be seen. And now she would make sure they did. Dana stood. Her heels touched the marble floor with a quiet authority that hadn't been there before. Across the room, a few heads turned, not many, just enough to feel the shift. She didn't rush, she didn't hesitate. She walked back to the front desk, each step measured. Controlled. Karen looked up, surprised to see her again. Dana kept her voice steady. "I've waited almost 2 hours." Karen blinked, then quickly looked down at her screen. "I told you, he's still in a meeting." Dana raised her hand slightly, not to argue, just to stop the excuse before it started. "I understand," she said, "but I need you to listen carefully." Karen froze. Dana leaned in just enough, her voice low but unmistakable. "This isn't about a delay. It's about who you think deserves to wait, and who doesn't." Karen's face went pale. For the first time all morning, she had no reply. Dana straightened her back, her expression calm but unshakable. Then she turned not toward the door, not to leave, but toward the hallway that led to the inner offices, the place where power hid behind frosted glass and polished doors. And she started walking. The corridor felt colder than the lobby. Softer lights, thicker carpet, silent walls lined with framed awards and gold-plated nameplates. Dana didn't slow down. She passed each closed door without blinking, her eyes fixed on the one at the end. Peter Lang, branch manager. Behind her, she heard Karen's voice, distant, nervous. "Ma'am, you can't go in there." But Dana didn't stop. She reached the door. She paused for just a moment, not from fear, from control, then knocked, once firm. Inside, silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. Peter Lang stood in the frame. Silver hair, navy suit, perfectly polished shoes. His expression said it all. He wasn't expecting her. And he didn't look pleased. Dana didn't flinch. She met his eyes and spoke calmly. "I had a 10 a.m. appointment. I've waited almost 2 hours. No one followed up, no one explained." Peter shifted in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable. "My apologies. Today's schedule has been a bit unpredictable." Dana nodded once. "I understand. But I came prepared. And I'm not here to be an afterthought." She stepped inside, passing him not with permission, but with purpose. For the first time all day, the balance had shifted, and Peter Lang felt it. Dana took a seat across from Peter's desk. Not as a guest, not as someone seeking favor. She sat like someone who belonged and knew it. Peter closed the door slowly, then walked around his desk, adjusting his tie. He sat down, cleared his throat, tried to regain control. "Well, Miss Wilson, I assure you, this is not how we normally operate." Dana looked directly at him. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the room like glass. "I know exactly how you operate. I saw it in the lobby. I watched your staff choose who to serve and who to stall." Peter leaned back slightly, defensive. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." Dana leaned forward. "No misunderstanding. I watched 5 clients arrive after me all white, all treated like they belonged. I'm a scheduled appointment. I'm a qualified partner. And yet, I waited while you entertained walk-ins." Peter looked down at his desk. His hands moved, adjusting papers that didn't need adjusting. He had nothing to say. And that silence said everything. Dana didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She just sat there, steady as stone, letting the weight of her words and their meaning settle into the space between them. The silence between Dana and Peter held for several seconds, long enough to feel like a shift in gravity. Peter finally looked up, his voice lower now, less polished. "I understand your frustration," he said, "but we're under a lot of pressure today. We've had unexpected visitors, high-priority clients." Dana tilted her head, her tone still calm. "And what am I?" Peter hesitated. His fingers tapped lightly on the desk. "You're important. Of course, we follow a certain intake process." She cut him off gently. "No. What you follow is an unwritten rule, one that says people like me wait." Peter leaned back, clearly uncomfortable. Dana continued, "I didn't come here just for a loan. I came because your bank requested a consultation. Brightcore has worked with Fortune 100 clients. You know who I am? Yet I was treated like a stranger." Peter tried to recover. Maybe the front desk wasn't aware. Dana raised an eyebrow. "They were aware. My name was on the schedule. I introduced myself clearly, but the receptionist looked right through me like I didn't count." She paused, then added softly, "Your staff didn't forget me. They erased me." Peter didn't respond, because there was nothing to defend. Dana's words had struck their mark, precise and undeniable. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had something stronger. Truth. She leaned back slowly in her chair, letting the silence do what it needed to. For a moment, all Peter could do was look down at the surface of his desk. But then, the unexpected happened. A knock. The door opened. 3 people stepped into the office, all dressed in dark suits, confident, composed. And leading them was Elizabeth Crane, CEO of Glenbridge Bank. Her presence shifted the air in the room. Everyone stood, even Peter, now visibly flustered. Elizabeth's sharp eyes scanned the room, and then softened as they landed on Dana. "Dana Wilson," she said, her voice surprised. "What are you doing here?" Dana stood calm and ready. "I had a scheduled appointment with Mr. Lang. I've been waiting nearly 2 hours." Elizabeth's face tightened. She turned to Peter, her voice no longer warm. 2 hours. Peter stammered. There were complications. But it was too late. The weight in the room had shifted again. Only this time it was in Dana's favor. Elizabeth's eyes didn't leave Peter's face. She didn't blink. 2 hours, she repeated, calm, but sharp enough to cut. Behind her, 2 board members stood silently, watching. Peter's shoulders sank. "I take full responsibility," he muttered. "There was a miscommunication." Dana spoke before Elizabeth could respond. "There was no miscommunication," she said. "Your team made a choice. They decided who looked important and who didn't." Elizabeth turned back to Dana. "I'm deeply sorry," she said. "This isn't how we operate." Dana nodded once, her voice clear. "But it is," she replied. "That's the problem. This isn't a rare mistake, it's a pattern, one that's gone unchecked because people like me are expected to stay quiet." Elizabeth took a deep breath, then looked at the board members. "I want a full review," she said. "Every front desk, every appointment policy, we're not sweeping this under the rug." Peter's face turned pale. Dana stood tall, her chin lifted. She wasn't just a client anymore. She was the mirror this institution had tried not to face. And now they had no choice but to look, because the silence she had carried in with her had finally found its voice. The door closed softly behind Elizabeth Crane. Inside the office, the air was different now. Peter Lang sat stiff in his chair, his hands clasped, his lips tight. He looked like a man bracing for impact. Dana remained standing. She didn't pace, she didn't gloat. She just stood calm, composed, and fully present. Across from her, the two board members took quiet seats. Elizabeth sat beside them. Her tone had shifted. Still respectful, but firm. "I want to understand exactly what happened," she said, from the moment Dana walked through the front door. Dana began to speak, slowly, clearly. She told them everything. How she was greeted with indifference. How she watched others' white clients, walk-ins, bypass her without question. How every minute that passed without acknowledgement wasn't just frustrating, it was humiliating. And how the receptionist's tone, the jokes whispered behind the desk, and the unspoken rules in that lobby made one thing very clear. She was not supposed to belong. No one interrupted. No one doubted her. Because deep down, they all knew. This wasn't just about a meeting that ran late. It was about a system one that chose who mattered, and who waited silently in the margins. Elizabeth's expression didn't change, but her eyes grew heavier with each word. When Dana finished, the room stayed quiet. Then Elizabeth turned to Peter. "Do you dispute anything she said?" Peter shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am." His voice was smaller than before. Elizabeth nodded, then looked at one of the board members. "I want Mr. Lang suspended, effective immediately. We'll begin an internal investigation today." Peter's eyes widened. He looked like he wanted to speak but stopped himself. There was nothing left to defend. No excuse that could soften the truth. The power he once held with a glance, a nod, a title had vanished. All it took was one woman who refused to stay quiet. Dana didn't smile. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for accountability. Elizabeth stood and looked her in the eyes. "Dana, I can't undo what happened, but I will make sure it never happens again." Dana nodded. "That's not just for me," she said. "It's for everyone who's ever been told, with silence or delay you don't matter." The weight of those words settled deep. Because this wasn't just the fall of one man. It was the crack in a structure long overdue for change. Elizabeth turned to her team. "I want every branch reviewed," she said, "especially the ones with the most foot traffic. No more hidden bias behind polished desks." The board members nodded, scribbling notes without a word. Dana stood quietly, her presence no longer ignored but centered. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't demanded special treatment. She had simply refused to be invisible. And that was enough to shift an entire room. Peter stood slowly, gathering the few papers still on his desk. His hands trembled slightly. As he walked past Dana, he paused. Their eyes met. For the first time all morning. Peter looked at her not with authority, but with regret. Dana said nothing. She didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken. And now it echoed in every corner of the building. As Peter left the room, the silence behind him wasn't just awkward. It was cleansing. A space finally cleared of excuses. Elizabeth stepped closer to Dana, her voice lower now. "We'll be in touch directly. You have my word." Dana nodded once more, calm and firm. In this moment, she didn't just reclaim her time, she reclaimed her power, and it was no longer silent. It was heard. Dana walked slowly out of the office. Each step felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because something had finally broken the silence. She passed by the same hallways, the same receptionist desk, the same polished marble floors. But now, everything looked different. Karen sat at the front, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't speak, she didn't smile. When their eyes met, Dana didn't scowl. She didn't need to. That look steady, calm, unshaken was enough. Enough to remind Karen of what she had ignored, and what it had cost. Dana walked past without a word. Outside, the sun still blazed, but it didn't feel harsh anymore. It felt honest. Real? Her phone buzzed in her hand. An email. Subject: loan application approved. She stared at the screen for a moment, then smiled, but not for the loan. That wasn't the win. The win was the look in Peter's eyes when the excuses failed. The silence in the room when truth was spoken. The way a system that had once judged her at a glance was now being forced to look closer. Because this time she made sure they saw her. Dana took a deep breath. The city air was thick and warm, but it filled her lungs like freedom. She stood at the edge of the sidewalk, watching cars pass, people move, life carry on, all unaware of the quiet battle she had just fought and won. And that was the point. No headlines. No applause. Just a woman who refused to disappear. She thought of the young interns in her company, the clients who looked like her, the students watching from the sidelines, wondering if the world would ever make room for them. She hadn't just made room today. She had demanded it, and received it not because someone gave her permission, but because she claimed it with calm and courage. Respect isn't granted by status. It's built by truth. Sometimes, it takes just one moment of standing tall to make an entire room sit up. Dana knew others might still face the same cold smiles, the same subtle doors closed behind polite words. But she also knew that today, a message had been sent. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. You don't have to shout to break a system. Sometimes you just have to stop waiting and walk forward. Dana turned the corner and paused beneath the shade of a tree. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappled and warm. She looked back once at the glass building behind her. It no longer felt towering, no longer untouchable. It was just a place that now had to remember what it tried to forget, that silent power doesn't stay silent forever. Her phone buzzed again, a text from one of her senior clients. Just saw the update. You handled that with class. Proud to be your partner. Dana smiled. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about making space, about clearing the silence so others could walk through with less fear. She thought of her mother's words, so many years ago. If they try to ignore you, make it the last mistake they ever make. And today she had, not with rage, not with noise, but with steady steps, strong words, and an unshakable sense of self. She crossed the street as the light turned green, her reflection briefly catching in a store window. She saw herself fully, clearly, with pride. And this time, no one was looking away. The next morning, the lobby at Glenbridge Bank felt different. Karen arrived early. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted papers and logged into her system. Every glance from her co-workers felt sharper. Every silence heavier. No one said it out loud, but they all knew what had happened. A client they overlooked, a woman they dismissed, had shaken the very floor beneath them. In the manager's office, Peter Lang's nameplate had already been removed. The office sat empty, silent, but not forgotten. Upstairs, Elizabeth Crane sat with her leadership team, reviewing notes, making calls, setting new standards. Dana's name was now more than a line on a schedule. It was a turning point, a reminder that power doesn't always walk in loudly. Sometimes it waits, watches, listens, and then it stands up. Across the city, Dana sat at her desk, sipping coffee, watching the morning sun filter through her office window. She didn't need headlines. She didn't want praise. What she wanted and what she now had was change. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been told, "Wait your turn," when what they deserved was to be seen. Now, without conditions, emails were already circulating. Policy reviews, meeting invites, a scheduled town hall on equity and client experience. At other branches, managers were asked to retrain front desk staff. Scripts were rewritten. Assumptions were challenged. All because one woman chose not to leave quietly. And Dana, she had moved on not out of spite, but out of purpose. She wasn't chasing apologies. She was building a path forward. Later that week, a junior employee at Glenbridge, a young black woman named Rochelle, stood at that same reception desk for the first time, nervous, hopeful, waiting. This time, Karen stood up, smiled, and said, "Welcome. We've been expecting you." Rochelle blinked, surprised by the warmth. She didn't know Dana personally, but that moment that greeting carried the weight of Dana's courage. A silent gift from someone who had spoken up, just once, at the right time. Back at Brightcore, Dana received another email. It wasn't about money, it wasn't even about the loan. It was a message from a stranger. "You changed something. I just wanted you to know." Dana smiled softly. That was the real win. Not approval, but impact. And it had already begun to spread. Dana stood by the window, watching the world below move on buses, coffee carts, students crossing the street. Everyday life. But for her, everything felt a little different now. She'd stepped into a building where she was expected to wait, to shrink, to accept less. But she didn't. She chose to speak. She chose to walk forward. And that choice rippled. Not just through policy, but through people. Through awareness. Through accountability. Not every battle is loud. Not every victory is visible. But some wins live in the quiet, in the shift of one decision, in the rethinking of one bias, in the welcoming of one new voice. Dana didn't need applause to know what she had done. She had shown the strength of being calm, the power of being clear, and the undeniable force of being present, not just for herself, but for every unseen person who had ever been told to sit quietly and wait. As the light poured across her desk, Dana whispered to herself, not out of pride, but out of truth. "They saw me, and now they'll never unsee me, because silent power doesn't disappear. It rises, and when it does, everything begins to change." If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher, one story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.